Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to our today's episode of the STP training webinar series. The title for our talk today is How to Rebuild Trust in Your Test Automation. And our guest speaker joining us on the webinar is Hima, Bindu, Peteti. I'm Smita Mishra. I'm a tester myself and a sustainability enthusiast too. And I'm excited to host you all and Hima, Bindu on our STP webinars. Bindu is also going to speak at our upcoming conference, Spring 2020 STP Con, which is coming up at San Diego from March 30th to April 2nd. And while the early bird discounts just got over, you can still register. The team discounts and alumni discounts on registrations are still available. And you can combine these discounts together to save really big. And for any further queries with respect to sponsoring, attending, or team registrations, send an email to info@softwaretestpro.com. Definitely visit the conference site, stpcon.com, for all the details. Bindu, at this point, I want to quickly ask you, if I remember clearly, I saw you attending one of the previous STPs, and now you are speaking there. So what was your motivation?
Yes, Smita. So I've attended STPCon a couple of years ago in Virginia, and I've enjoyed having a very good session from the industry best leaders in the test automation and testing area, performance testing, security testing. I mean, it covered all sorts of testing phases. And I'm still following those leaders in the LinkedIn, and I'm getting a lot of updates from industry best practices and other things. It is really helpful to my career, and I can't wait for the next session in the spring.
Absolutely. And we can't wait to have you there and speak there. It's an absolute pleasure for the STP team to have one of our attendees now grow up as a speaker and be there. So really looking forward to your session. Yeah, all right. And before we get started with the webinar, we have two important updates to share with you. Firstly, we are inviting proposals for webinars from all of you, and this shall be open all year round. So you can submit anytime you're ready. If you have an idea and wish to be considered for these webinars, do send in your proposals. All the details along with the submission form are at the link given on the screen. Please go through them. And while we are on the subject of submissions for speaking, let me also remind you that the call for papers for STPCon Fall 2020 is open until the 28th of February. So if you wish to speak at that conference, please do submit your workshops or sessions. Again, the link is available on softwaretestpro.com. And secondly, there is an upcoming webinar, Reading Between the Lines, Correcting ATDD, Myths and Traps, on the 11th of March this year. The speaker is Jason Edstrom, who is the Senior Quality Engineer at Magenic Technologies. In this webinar, Jason will talk about his experiences working on ATDD projects and some of the myths and traps that he corrected along the way. The link is up for you to register. Please do go for it. Just in case I wasn't saying it right, ATDD, that's Acceptance Test Driven Development. Yeah, hoping to see you all there too. And if you are on Twitter, please do share the conference and call for papers information and also about this webinar with your followers and connections. You can add STP's Twitter handle. All right, let's get started with the webinar today. Welcome, Bindu. We are very excited to have you with us today. And let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. Hima Bindu Peteti has over 13 years of experience in building large-scale web applications in Java and JEE. She's also passionate about designing test automation frameworks. She has tremendous experience in coaching and mentoring the teams in terms of strategies and best practices. She's currently working as a technical manager at FannieMae, a financial company that uses agile methods to accelerate the delivery of secure and reliable software. Bindu has worked with various organizations, including startups and Fortune 100 companies. She's experienced in building a wide variety of automation frameworks for large and complex applications. Those frameworks empower QA to shift closer to developers by moving beyond typical functional testing into the close quarters of unit testing. So let's start learning and understand how to rebuild trust in your test automation. So Bindu, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Smita, and thank you STPCon for providing me this opportunity. And thanks everyone for taking time to join this session. So today's topic is all about how to rebuild trust in your test automation. So I would like to state the problem first, and we all know in today's world how important it is to actually create some good test automation frameworks, because it directly affects the releases, the time to market your business functions, and the time to actually compare with your competitors and other stuff. So we all know that the test automation plays a very key role in our today's culture. And at the same time, based on the trends that we are seeing, the test automation fails to live up to its promise. So it creates lots of false positives. It creates lots of confusion, frustration. Instead of giving the confidence and trust on the complete product, we often rely on other sources along with the test automation. This test automation is not the only source anyway. And so this session will be focused completely on how to rebuild that kind of trust, and what are the best practices that we might have to follow, and what are some of the practices that we might have to eliminate in our process to get better understanding of the strategy and other things. So with that, so I would like people to focus on these takeaways. So I would like to start with developing how to develop a test automation strategy that perfectly aligns with your business, followed by understanding failures. So first of all, if you have to identify success, we have to understand what causes failures and how to fix them. And I'll focus on the success ingredients, how to future-proof your test automation projection and other stuff, and how to increase ROI on that. So these are the 4 takeaways I would like the team to expect after this session. So I don't want to again jump on this, and I would like to thank Smita again for introducing me. With that, this will be the high-level agenda. So I'll start with the strategy that aligns with the business, failure analysis, and success ingredients, continuous integration process, what are the best practices, and what is the return on investment. And first of all, if you have to define a success or a failure, so how do we define it? We match it with our goals and see if we reach our goal, then that's definitely a success. And if we cannot, maybe that's a failure, right? So how to define goals? And even if you see the personal goals that people do have in the same home, each person will have the individual goals, right? So these cannot be generally defined. So the same thing applies to the testing and test automation strategies as well. It completely depends upon the business, how critical the business is, and what are we exactly testing, what is the key component. And it depends on a lot of other things, right? So I thought of putting some questions together to help you realize what exactly are your goals when it comes to the test automation. So the first goal is basic. The first question is basically, what is the purpose and what are we exactly trying to solve with the test automation? And what is when do you think will be the success criteria? So when will you think the success will be achieved? At what level of time? What exactly is success do mean to you in your test automation? And what are you trying to solve in the future state with the current vision in mind? And what exactly at the end of the test automation, at the end of the cycle, or whatever it is. So what exactly am I trying to see? What exactly I need? And is my goal measurable? And it has to be realistic, by the way. So it's not only important to set up some goals and cannot meet. So it has to be realistic and time bound. So ask these questions to yourself in coming up to the goals. And based on my experience and all, so based on my project and based on my experience, so I thought of creating these kinds of goals. So first of all, test automation results should actually detect changes. So there might be some myths people are thinking about. Test automation should find defects, test automation should find bugs, but that's not the right kind of mindset. The test automation should detect changes. And in my view, each automation script should work like a robot in an army. So that should tell me what are the changes that has been happened in this particular release or in this particular story that has been developed or so. So as an engineer, we should understand whether that change is expected or unexpected, or is it a bug or whatever it is. So the first and foremost goal for me is my automation should detect the change. And the second one is basically how fast the change should happen. So I cannot. The change should actually, as soon as the application development is done, my test automation should detect the changes very quickly, and so that it reduces the feedback cycle time. And the last but not the least one, improve the flow of work between the different phases, between the development phase. As soon as I develop, I get the feedback. Again, I change it something. Again, I test it. Again, I do it. So this kind of flow, the improvement in that flow should happen. So these are the three key goals that I thought might be used for my particular company or project or whatever it is. And again, these are not hard and fast rules. It completely depends on how you think and what is completely necessary for your business. So keep these goals in mind. And in order to reach to these goals, let's see what are the things that we have to consider when creating a test automation strategy. And it has to be perfectly aligned with your business needs. So the first and foremost, what I thought is a technology. So I have seen in companies where people have a standard set of test automation framework that they have to use no matter what the technology team is using in terms of developing the application. For example, if the application is developed in .NET, the test automation as a company goal, they might have to use some kind of Ruby or some other Water or some kind of application frameworks. But in my view, if you are closer to the application programming language, that would add a lot of value. I can explain you in the next few minutes like how it is. But when you're creating a automation strategy, this is one important key thing that you have to consider. And understanding the complete product at a end-to-end level is very lot of important, because because I have seen in this problem big in much bigger companies. In much bigger companies, basically what happens is each individual team will be working in simple modules individually at a project level, and they don't consider thinking about the complete product level. So with that, they might miss some kind of integration points and some other testing, lot of other flows and other things. So when you're creating a test automation strategy, it is very important to give that product overview or kind of where it aligns and all in your strategy. And the third most important thing is infrastructure. So you have to be very realistic about your test execution infrastructure and what exactly is your product infrastructure, how your execution infrastructure matters with the product infrastructure. These are the things that we have to consider. I'm going to explain you in the next coming slides about that. And what are the strategies that we have to follow in creating the test automation scripts? So how robust the scripts has to be? What are the best practices and coding standards and other things? We have to pay good observation on those as well. And execution strategy, and it's not only important to execute them, but analyzing the results in the right way is also a key thing. So keeping all these things into consideration when creating a test automation strategy is a key. And most important thing that we have been observing these days is the team's context. When you are creating a strategy, it is very important to understand the team's perspective. So I think 90% of the companies these days are following agile. But even though they say they are agile, each individual team member, they lives in their own bubble. The developers, the test team doesn't have an idea of what the developer is doing, and the developer doesn't have an idea of what the test automation is creating test for the code that he has written. And the same thing follows for the other roles in the team as well. So if you want to be really successful in your test automation strategy, it is really important to have a idea of what the other team is doing and how important this thing is. It creates a lot of empathy towards the other roles, and it builds the culture of a T-shaped individuals, which is helpful for the product, business, and the team. So, and it is, so let me give you an example of why I thought this is important, because I was not a big believer of the T-shapedness like a couple of years ago, because learning one skill itself is very tough, and how come we can actually gain other skills as well. But we tried it for a couple of weeks, and this is what we tried in our company. So we have a bunch of, this is just in one team, we have a bunch of developers, bunch of SDATs, and manual roles and other things. So we all came up with this skill matrix. So each one of us know a particular area. I don't want to go into each and individual levels for the sake of time. But each and every one of us, we went into individual area, and we came into this metric saying that we know it, we need it, and we can teach it. And we tried this exercise for 6 weeks. We tried to teach developers how to test, and testers how to develop, and other things. So during the 6 weeks of journey, I realized a lot of things actually created awareness, because when the tester team, automation team is actually struggling to understand what exactly, how exactly they have to identify this particular element, then the dev team said, hey, why are you even testing at this level? We are already taking care at that unit level, so you don't need to worry about this particular one. And other things are like, oh, is it that hard to identify this particular element? I can add a unique identifier at this particular place. So over the period of time, what this happened is it created empathy for the role, and the developers are thinking in terms of adding testability to the application. They are not only focusing on delivering the features, they are also focusing on creating this testability in mind. And there are many other good benefits, and now we don't have a role difference. We all do everything. So this is one important thing that you have to consider when creating a good test automation strategy. So now I would like to talk a little bit about the continuous integration piece of it and how important it is in today's world. So everybody might be knowing about the continuous integration piece of it, but I would like to reiterate it just for the sake of giving a sense about it. So we see the delivery teams, they check in the code. Delivery team can be your developers and other people, so they'll be checking the code, and the source code repository will be polling, and people who are writing the test automation or something, they write code on this particular one, and then the email report with all the failures and other things will be reported back to the delivery team. Again, the delivery team will fix it and then checks in the code, and the CI goes like this. So this is the ideal situation where we want to be land in with our test automation. This will provide faster feedback. If your test runs along with your JUnits, that would add really good value. But in today's world, the common problem is the test automation will be very bulky. So if you put it as part of the build goes forever, and we obviously have to remove this and run it as a separate regression suite. So why is it so bulky, and what are the ways to reduce it, and how to make this process effective is what the agenda for today. So with that, we are done with understanding what things that we have to include in our automation strategy. Now let's try to understand what are the common test automation failures. So I've divided these into these 4 quadrants. These are the most common patterns that I have observed in a lot of the companies and teams. So the first and foremost one is inadequate test coverage. So some teams will have hundreds and hundreds of tests, but that will not test the right path, or that will not test the key component. So it definitely not. If you have hundreds of tests, it doesn't mean that we have the right coverage. Most probably, this coverage gap will be because they might not able to understand the complete flow of it, or they miss part of the requirements. So, and misconceptions about what can be tested at the automation end-to-end functional level, and what can be tested, what cannot be automated. So that is one of the gap which causes this inadequate test coverage. And once we understand the coverage piece of it, and when it goes to the implementation piece of it, we see a lot of failures there as well. People often try to automate everything from the GUI, from the user interface level, which becomes very slow, flaky results and other problems. And not having tests at the right level, they write the automation, but instead of having it at the unit level, they push it to the automation. So failure to implement it the right way is one of the biggest problems. And in some teams, advanced teams, what I observed is they know the coverage piece of it, and they actually put a lot of effort in implementing it in the right way, but they execute it, they don't worry about the results. So only when it comes to the release level regression or something, they'll worry about fixing those issues. So this is because there might be too many flaky issues or too many failures, and they thought it might be important to deliver more than fixing the older ones. And finally, a lack of visibility on the test results to the management and other perspectives is also one of the biggest reasons to failure. So let's talk about individual things in depth over this session, and let's see how we can fix this. So firstly, I want to focus on the inadequate test coverage. As I mentioned before, I just want to reiterate, more number of tests doesn't mean that you have actual good coverage. But how to ensure that we don't miss any part of the function or application, and how to ensure the right test coverage. The first and foremost suggestion I would do is following XP methodologies and test coverage in terms of test coverage. So what are these XP methodologies? So if you are doing a lot of innovation only at the space of test automation, it's definitely not going to help to the suite. You have to re-emphasize on your development practices as well. So I would like to focus here only on the testing piece of it. So when you push it to the extreme, people suggest doing test-driven development, behavior-driven development, and other things. You might have heard about these terms in a couple of other places, but when we follow behavior-driven development in the right way, it fosters collaboration between the delivery team and the technical team. So if you change the specs, if the product owners or the business teams, they change the spec, underlying requirement changes, so underlying test will fail definitely. So that way we ensure that there is a tight coupling between the requirement and our test code. So it ensures that collaboration, and test-driven development also gives a lot of coverage on the test code and other stuff. So other than requirement traceability metrics, following these extreme programming methodologies might provide a very good value. And not only that, so user journey mapping is one of the important things that we have to consider when we are understanding the feature flow. So if we put our scenarios in this format, so we will never miss a scenario. So for example, in this case, I'm showing online shopping feature. So there is a login feature, there is a search product and view product details, add product to cart, and the user can do multiple things over here. So if you understand the user journey path and you create these kinds of graphs, it will definitely help you in identifying the right coverage. And we don't have to do it manually. And these days, we have very good tools that can actually help in identifying these critical paths. For example, at FannieMae, we used to follow in some teams follow this model-based testing with tools like Confirmic, and they will help us actually these kind of tools will help us in identifying the right path, fewer number of tests that will give good coverage. And also Hexawise is one tool that is also very intelligently, it can identify the path of the application. So I would encourage to follow either manually or based on your need, follow these kinds of tools to understand the coverage gaps and prioritize based on your business needs and try to deliver it as fast as you can with our CI and other process. And the third most important thing is C4 model. You might have heard about this term in terms of software architecture, but this is very, very important for a test team to have an idea of what it is and how our functions are actually applicable in the application architecture layer. So context diagram, container diagram, component diagram, and code. So for visualizing your software architecture, just like how the building architecture team, how they create some kind of models and then they build based on their models. This is exactly how the software architecture should actually create their diagrams and follow based on it. So this is an example of the context diagram. It gives the context of what the system is doing. So this is where it helps the test in the testing phase, where you actually have to understand where my application is deployed and what is the integration point, how it is calling the database. So if you understand all these things, it's easy to have test code written in this format. And this is component diagram. So this is much more important because I have seen in bigger companies where people work in individual. So one team will be working in this controller module, other team will be working in the such products controller module, and so forth. So, and part of the team, they'll be so much involved in creating tests at this particular level, and they completely forgets about how it makes calls to the other components and other things. So this is definitely not, if you are not following all these kinds of things, our test will not fail for the right reason, or it will not pass for the right reason. So it is very, very important to understand these integration points and how you were, and then on top of it, how it integrates with the other piece of it in our complete product. So if you do this extreme programming methodologies, user journey mappings, either manually or do it in a automation fashion with some tools, C4 models, you will never miss any coverage gap in your test automation. And there are some other tools like C-Lights as well, which will automatically detect the change that you have writing for the particular code, and it will create those kinds of. It will give you the kinds of tests to run for that particular build. So you can also use those kinds of tools, and FannieMae we use those tools as well for this purpose. It speeds up your build process. So that's all about understanding gaps. And the second problem is basically when it comes to the coverage is misconceptions about what can be automated and what cannot. So I see a huge variation in teams when it comes to the understanding of what can be automated, what cannot. Some teams we do 100% automation, and we don't have manual testers anymore, and we don't want to do manual testing at all. And in my view, in my experience, that causes more damage than having a 0% automation. There are good reasons why, because it takes a lot of time, the failures will be more and other things. So again, these are not hard and fast tools. I thought of putting something together related to my experience, but critical path of the web application. So if you see some of the critical paths, and no matter if you are touching that particular component at that particular release, these kind of things should always be tested. So it's a very good candidate for automating. And the second one is high risk tests. So some of the it's very natural in most of the projects. Like some of the things are very risky. It always fails for particular reason, and it's kind of thing. So those should all definitely be automated, and which is repeated, which we have to test repeatedly across browsers, across environments. Those kinds of tests has to be definitely automated. And there is no question about regression, smoke, and sanity. You always have to automate these kinds of tests. And if your test takes too long to test it manually, that's a very good candidate to automate as well. And we can do parallel testing to improvise the cycle time. And other than this, if you're having only if you're the contradiction to this, so if you don't see that repeated pattern and all, there is no point in automating those kinds of things. So yeah. So now that we understood how to eliminate the coverage gap and how to understand what needs to be automated and what not. So now let's focus on the flakiness. So this is the major blocker in most of the test automation results. So today you might have gone through this scenario. Today the test will pass and tomorrow it will fail. Again tomorrow some other test will fail and some other test will pass. So this is a regular culture in most of the teams, and people usually they forget about creating awareness on this. In my last STP con, I met Angie, and in her presentation, she mentioned it became like a shepherd boy and the wolf story, and I really like that analogy, and that is very much true about it. So, and how to eliminate this gap, right? So we definitely have to understand how to test it at the right level. So in most of my talks, I have given this particular screen in a different way and asked a lot of users to tell me how you can automate this login functionality. Then most of them, they jumped in and saying that, hey, we can do it from the Selenium. It's very easy. But looking at a screen and understanding, looking into the functionality, we should never jump into judging on where we should automate. There is a definite need to understand the underlying components, how they have developed it. And that is where I said in the previous slide, understand the technology piece of it. You have to be closer with your application development language or whatever it is, technology. So it's very important to understand all these particular flows. And this slide shows why. Because this is a C4 model, or this shows the login sequence. So my login sequence starts from here. So I opened up a UI, and the page is loaded. The request goes to the Angular page, and then again it goes. I'm calling a service from the Angular page, and it goes to the backend service, and then it goes to the business layer for performing some kind of validations, which retrieves from data from the database. And again, the flow go back here. And in today's world, if we write only scenario for this particular level, and if my DB goes down, my test doesn't have an idea of what went wrong. It just fails. And if the API goes down, if the token expires, authentication system expires, my test doesn't have any clue of what it is. It just fails for the wrong reason. Instead, if we have checks at each and every layer like this, at unit, integration, and other pieces of it, the test will fail for the right reason. And if the DB goes down, my unit test will catch it at that particular moment, and it fails for the right reason. So if you test at this particular level, all I get is today it will pass, and again the engineers has to spend a lot of time in understanding, debugging what went wrong. At one particular point, they'll see, oh, this went down. So the amount of time that we keep on in terms of this fixing these kinds of things is becomes quickly a nightmare. So this is a very simple flow. This might look very easy, but there in real world there will be very complex flows, and the emphasis on testing at the right level is very, very important. So this goes back to the testing pyramid strategy. So this testing pyramid analogy has been given by a person called Mike Cohns, and ever since it has been become a very big key thing in test automation world. So I would like to explain a little bit about the analogy. Most of you might have known it, but I just wanted to, for the context, I just wanted to give it. So if you have seen in this pyramid, if people who are building at the base level, it just arranging some blocks is pretty much easier. As you go up and up, so you see this much of amount of labor that goes into the building it. So they need some kind of stairs, and a lot of people has to be involved in building these kind of things. So this is the same analogy that has been given to the testing pyramid. So laying out these unit tests is much more easier. Executing them is much faster. As you go up and up into the layers at the end-to-end level, the data setup that has been needed, and as simulating the environments in like a development environment, those things will get harder and harder. So we have to minimize that as much as we can. So that's the analogy. And again, this is a model and it's an analogy, and it's not a hard and fast rule. So it's always important to create your own test pyramid according to your needs, and there is nothing like you have to put 80% here, 20% here, like that. So in mobile applications, UI look and feel is also very important. We cannot say that we minimize that effort. So if you take the microservices architecture, service integration is the key. So we cannot say that we are missing other things here. So based on your need, based on your thing, so create some kind of method like this. So it might be a triangle, or it might be a hexagon, or it might be something else. But the focus should be high ROI tests. Should be at the bottom, and as you go up into the up, so the effort has to be minimum. So that's the analogy about testing pyramid. So now we know what to automate and where to automate. So at the end-to-end functional test, right? So when we create a good test automation framework, it is very important to, especially when you are working with object-oriented programming like Java or .NET, we always have to keep in mind about our design patterns. So high cohesion and low coupling are the main two things that we always have to consider. So what are these? So low coupling means, so in the modules that you are, in the design that you are creating in your application, the coupling has to be very low. So you always have to think about, if you have to plug it in new feature or new thing, it should be very easy. If you have to extend some kind of features, it has to be very easy. If you have to refactor, it has to be very easy. If the module is completely coupled up with the other modules, then it becomes quickly a nightmare in terms of maintenance, reusability, and extensibility. So in my view, we always have to follow low coupling and high cohesion. I'll give an example of how we have to do it. And the three lenses: extensibility, maintainability, and reusability. When you're building these three, we have to do it. So to give an example, in my previous experience, I worked with lots and lots of teams in FannieMae and other companies as well. This is not only thing with the companies that I worked on, but in general, in industry, what the observation is basically, people say that we are doing BDD. What they think is they just write some test cases in Cucumber given when then format, and they think that's the BDD. BDD is definitely not about test automation. It's about collaboration. It's a collaboration tool, and people misuse it for test automation. And I would like to show how it's going to look like. So we all know these are the given when then feature files, and we convert them into scenarios, different scenarios, and each scenario will be an executable specification, right? So when we when we choose test automation, only we are not doing BDD, but we are considering Cucumber as a framework for your test automation, we are creating a lot of, we are misusing the tool than creating benefits out of it. So this is a simple Cucumber architecture. So we'll have a feature file in the given when then formats. Those will be converted into step definitions. And the step definitions will have, because they don't carry state from one step to a different step, people start creating different implementations. And then, of course, we follow page objects to much more cleaner abstraction. And we have configuration details, which will be related to the database, environment, and other configuration details and other utilities. So this model is an example of high coupling model. It's tightly coupled. I'll show how. So in this particular, this is an example of how adding multiple feature files, multiple teams are working on it, and we don't know which particular line goes into which feature file, because the way that Cucumber JVM works is completely different. So if you add a step over here in the given when then format, we don't know at what particular step it has landed and what particular implementation is calling in this particular step. And if I have to add a here, and if I go into this particular step, if I have to change this page objects, configuration details and all, this is creating this kind of spaghetti code for me. So this is definitely not the right way to think about it. If you are considering BDD only for the sake of test automation, I would suggest not to do it. Instead, just go for the alternative solutions using JUnit or TestNG. But if you want to use BDD for the sake of collaboration and other stuff, that's the best framework ever, and it provides lots and lots of benefits. So in this particular model, I wanted to show how the same kind of thing can be achieved with multiple features. So all you have to do is you will have a particular test code for a particular test class, and you whenever some change happens to that, you just go here and change it. And it's like a one-stop call to call your page objects, utilities, configurations, or whatever. And if I have to add another module here, it's much easier. So this kind of design might be a right candidate if you want to focus on your solid architecture. And now that we know page object design pattern is also one important thing to consider. You might have heard about that. It's all about abstracting the elements out of the page. So this is an example of, now I'm going to talk about coding standards. This is an example of some kind of messy code. Even though we have good architecture and other good things, we always have to emphasize on each and every test code that we are looking into. In this test case, it's completely, I'm actually creating a lot of weights and other things in the same script, configuring details in this particular script and all. So this is not completely focused on one objective. It has lots and lots of objectives. So as a good practice, we always have to think about focusing on one objective. If some people who want to read your test, they should get that objective very quickly by looking at your test. So the same test looks like this if you are not focusing on the objective. The same test will look like this if I have eliminated test data from the actual test code. Sorry about that. And I have eliminated environment-specific configuration details. I have abstracted those things out, and I'm putting that in a different file. And some of them I'm controlling it from my CI pipeline, not the other things. Yeah, this is another example of file downloads. This is kind of messy code when I include everything in the code itself. Instead, if I abstract all those things out, it might look much simpler like this. So these are the coding practices that we just have to adopt and consider. And other coding practices. So especially when you're working with UI automation, you definitely have to think about your located strategy. As a team, you have to have this kind of conversation among your people who are developing and other things. So the locator strategy should always be some kind of unique identifier like ID, name, definitely not absolute expats, because that is always very flaky, and it makes your test flaky. So if some element is added or removed from the screen, your test will definitely have to be refactored or changed. So the locator strategy is very important thing to consider and make it as unique as possible. Thank you. And the next one is the synchronization strategy. So if it's in UI automation, it is very common that we usually do lots of sleepings and sleep and other things. But these thread dot sleeps or any other things, they are completely depends on the environment. In one environment, you might have to put it for 7 seconds. In other environments, you have to put it for 4 seconds or whatever it is. So these kind of things, we just have to eliminate all these things. Instead of doing that, you always have to follow expected conditions. Conditional weights are very much important, and eliminating multiple points of failure. So your test has to fail for a valid reason. If your scenario is something like you are setting up some data, acting on it, and then you are verifying it. Again, you are testing it. Again, you are setting up data. Again, you verify it. Then definitely that's not a good because it fails for multiple reasons, and we don't know. We will definitely not get that failure implementation at the right moment. So it's good to follow that arrange act asset pattern, and it fails for the right reason with one objective. And and it is also very good to actually reduce the cyclomatic complexity of the class and methods. So what this means is basically each method should not be more than 20 lines or 15 lines or 30 lines based on your skill set and other capacity models. You have to reduce that because this will violate the single responsibility and other patterns, which will eventually create maintenance issues. So based on your experience and based on your project needs, I would suggest creating these kinds of coding standards and make them as and make them into our daily life cycle will be very important. And the most important thing is treat automation code like production code. Because in some scenarios, what most of the testers might know this already. From the development perspective, it might be about adding another role or another particular functionality to a piece of existing code. But when we think about it in terms of testing strategy, it's always about it might create hundreds and hundreds of scenarios for that particular one. So when you see the amount of code that we have to develop for the automation versus the production code, automation code is definitely much higher, bigger in number. So we always have to treat it with the same level of effort that we have to put it for the production code. And as I mentioned before, these three, reusability, maintainability, and extensibility, should be the lenses. So for that, how to treat it like a production code? As I mentioned before, create a list of coding standards according to the application or need, and perform code review strategies, just like how they do for the production code. Automation code should also be reviewed at least by 2 people or whatever it is. This is just an example. And it's definitely worth to run the sonar coverage because over the period of time, for a much mature team, it might not be needed, but running sonar coverage for the test code in terms of reusability. So the sonar report shows what is the reusability rating on it, what is the maintainability rating on it. So all these kinds of ratings, we can measure them and make progress based on the other things. And capturing metrics like this to improve the test coverage, time to release the build, and improving time to market. So these are the key things that we have to make sure and make these as 10 commandments. The coding standards come up with the 10 the best, because if you put more, the teams might not follow. So these kind of things we just have to make sure. And now that we know how to eliminate that flakiness, the other problem is the execution strategy. If you have hundreds and hundreds of tests, there is no point in running them in sequential. Then that's not helping the automation at all. So I have to get faster feedback according to my goal. So why does actually test takes too long? It might be something because we are not following the fail fast techniques. So what are the fail fast techniques? So, for example, if my test has to verify the database results, 1,000 database results with 1,000 of the XML file coming. So my XML has to match with the database, for example. So the first we have to match the number of records, and then the size of the records, and then the third step will be the content. So if you don't worry about the list first and then doing the content at the same time, it has to wait until the 1,000 records matched, and then it goes by like that. So understanding putting these fail fast techniques in mind is definitely important thing to consider. And the other thing is avoid dependencies in test execution. So it should not have a lot of dependencies. So if you have to test an update, you don't have to rely on the create one. So you have to make them individual and cleaning it up. And cleaning up the test data after execution is also a very important thing, because that might affect other test cases as well. So most of the teams, they don't follow this thing, but it's very important to follow it. And never ever write your automation through UI, automate the data setup through UI. Instead, use some kind of tools or the DB related stuff. Yeah, that's what it is. And I'll just open up for questions in 2 minutes after this. So once we understand the parallel execution, fail fast techniques, avoiding dependencies and other stuff, the real challenge again lies in terms of analyzing those results. So in today's world, people have hundreds and hundreds of Jenkins jobs. Each one will do a particular test suite or something. And some person actually, they have to sit and understand, is it a valid failure or it's not a valid failure? And then they'll come up with some kind of Excel sheet to show what kind of results these are. But even much matured teams, they don't actually do this kinds of analysis on the test results. So over the past couple of builds, how many tests have failed? What is the trend of these failures? What are the flaky tests? And what are the tests that never failed? So the test never failed, so is it doing something or is it just sitting there? So we definitely have to get a clear understanding of what our test strategy is doing. A simple solution will be plug it in some kind of DB with your test results and create some kind of reports on top of it. But we do, and we have some other open source tools like Report Portal and other things which will use sophisticated reporting mechanism which has AI and machine learning capabilities as well. That will over time it eliminates a lot of need for manual analysis, and it also creates a visualization view of all your test results to the management to take actionable decisions on that. Yeah, with that, I hope you will take these techniques to at the code implementation level, test execution process level, and report analysis level for a successful test automation. Yep. With that, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Bindu. It was a very insightful session on building robust test automation frameworks. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll quickly bring them up. All right. The first question is, do you have a sample automation test strategy to reference as a guide or maybe a template? Then this would be helpful for getting started. Is that something you can share? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Smita. That's a very good question, and I definitely have that, and send it over to you. Maybe you can distribute it to the audience.
Yes. So if surely you can send it to info@softwaretestpro.com, and then we can take it from there and share it with the attendees. All right. The next question here is, are there readily available tools which can help a team develop a C4 model of their application and testing?
Yes, Smita. There are some kind of tools, even in the C4 site, if they have gone. It's not completely on top of my head, but there are definitely tools that actually automatically creates these kinds of flows. And as I mentioned in the previous slides, there are some kind of tools like Hexawise and model-based testing, Confirmic, which helps us in understanding the application flow. They will convert lot of paths and into smaller individual key application flow area. So there are some tools on top of it, but C4 definitely there are some, but it's not on top of my head right now.
No worries. So once you, whenever you're sending in the strategy template, you could, if you could share the tool names also, we will share the same with the attendees or post those as a blog post for the attendees to have a look.
Sure, that sounds good.
And Barry, who had asked the question, has also put a comment that thank you. This was an excellent presentation. Very refreshing to see a comprehensive developmental overview of automation. There is something for testers of all levels and abilities in the presentation. So, good. I'll ask you just one more question, Bindu. And thank you, Barry. Thank you for sharing your feedback. People are asking for slides. Yes, like I mentioned at the start of the webinar, these slides and the talk has been recorded, so you'll receive a link to go through the webinar again. Last question here, Bindu. How do you define risk-based testing? You mentioned some tools. Can you please share them again?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So C-Lights is one tool that we use it in FannieMae. It's a very good tool. What it will do is basically they have some kind of agents that will be installed in our app servers. They'll poll the code, and as we and they actually talks to our CI process as well. So whenever we check in a new code, the agents will poll the thing, and then it creates this complex path of what can be, what are the tests that are affected, and what shows only those kinds of tests which will help us in speeding up our process. C-Lights is the one that we use. It also has, they are building a lot of new features to C-Lights as well. It has artificial intelligence as well, so which automatically detects the changes and helps us in testing the right things, not testing the whole world all the time. So that's a very good one.
All right. Thank you for the response, Bindu. And I think we're done with the questions for now, for here. And
thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, thank you again, Bindu, for all sharing all the details. That really helps a lot. And I'm really sure our attendees found it to be very informative and useful. So thank you again. And I hope to see you at STPCon.
Yeah, I can't wait for that session.
Thank you. It was very well done. So thank you again. Well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you again for joining, and more importantly, thank you for being engaging and making the most of the webinar for yourself and the whole group. If you want to see more such sessions from Bindu and wish to learn more about test automation frameworks, do join us at STPCon Spring 2020. You can have a look at the complete program at stpcon.com. And there are so many talks on all major areas of testing and upcoming technologies presented by the best of the speakers around. And at any point, should you have queries on registrations, do email them at info@softwaretestpro.com. Also, let me remind you, the call for submissions for the webinars is open and will be open all year round. Please do send in your proposals as soon as possible. And of course, submit to STPCon Fall 2022. The CFP ends on 28th of Feb. Stay tuned for more webinars at softwaretestpro.com. We have an upcoming webinar, which is Reading Between the Lines, Correcting ATDD Myths and Traps on the 11th of March. So the speaker is Jason Edstrom, who's the Senior Quality Engineer at Magenic Technologies. And in this webinar, Jason will be talking about his experiences of working on ATDD projects and some of the myths and traps that he corrected along the way. If the subject interests you, please do sign up for the same, again at softwaretestpro.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all in San Diego in March. And I have heard Coronado is one of the most beautiful beach places. So all you traveler testers, definitely come over and keep practicing your testing skills. Thank you.